Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. The other day, I came to the pond, and overnight, a mass of frog spawn had been laid, and it's gradually been added to. That first day, the sun rose up, it got warm, and I heard this churring mechanical sound, really loud. Crept up to the pond, and there were about 30 or 40 frogs thrashing around in this corner of the pond. Really exciting. Because, of course, frogs, as well as being fascinating animals and really welcome in any garden, serve the incredibly useful function of devouring slugs. So they're part of a healthy garden. So the more frog spawn and the more frogs we have, the better.
This week, we visit a couple that share a passion for gardening, but not always in the same place at the same time.
He does need to get planning permission to do anything in the garden, in my garden.
Yeah, in your garden. But once I cross the border, it's mine, so...
And we're back in South Africa to see how the wild species of Agapanthus have been bred to become a favourite in our British gardens.
In a sort of a shady area, it will kind of like bling out at you. It really is a tough plant.
I say that frogs eat slugs, which is just as well here, because we have a mass of hostas. And I guess I get more questions about how to stop slugs and snails eating hostas than every other horticultural question combined. We're obsessed by it, that they rip our lovely plants to shreds. Well, I think there are two answers to that. One is have defenders like toads and frogs, and the other is to grow them really well. And that means healthy plants with lots of food and lots of water. However, be careful what you wish for, because here, where we have a mass of hostas, last year they grew too well, and they were just whopping great leaves. And the downside of that was that other more delicate plants, particularly the primulas, just got crowded out and got no light, and I think some of them certainly died. So what I want to do is lift some of the hostas, divide them so they're a bit smaller, replant them, and then I've got spare plants which I'm going to move to another part of the garden. And you need to do this with the hosta about every 3 or 4 years, and that will rejuvenate it more than anything else. And this is the perfect moment. When you get these bullet points appearing out the ground, just dig round the whole plant with a spade. Now you can see that is a great lump of root. And as long as a section has a bud on it, it will regrow. Let's go. There we go. And you can see that is Longmeadow soil. Heavy, clay, very moisture retentive, which of course is what hostas love. I'm going to put this back where it was, and I will pack around that with some compost just to give it a little bit of a boost, and the other half I can take to a new home. So I've got myself a free plant apart from anything else. Now, in our obsession with all the different variations of foliage of hostas, we do tend to overlook the virtue of the flowers. And I bet a lot of people who grow hostas are not aware that some of them can be very fragrant. And last summer, we went to visit James and Carol Coutts, who have the national collection of fragrant hostas.
When we moved here, we came with 2 lorry loads of plants and 1 lorry load of our goods and chattels. It was really a blank canvas. It was mostly grass, and we had obviously the backdrop of the trees, which was wonderful. So it was really a nice blank canvas to work on.
We've been here for 10 years now. We moved up from Dorking in Surrey. I had 3 allotment plots and lots of hostas on them, and I just felt that I really needed them around me. Also, we both had health problems. In our previous job, we weren't in control of our workload. Probably the reason we became unwell. But moving here, we both really wanted to create a garden.
Yeah, I think it's something we both always wanted to do. Over time, between the two of us, we both have our own strengths.
I look at the garden as something positive that's come out of having ill health. I've dug all the flower beds by hand, and it feels like getting a lot of angst out, and feels really positive that something good has come from it. We're now on the border of hosta land, which is my garden, where I can go and do whatever I want without permission. The rest of the garden is Carol's garden, and I have to make an appointment to do anything in there apart from walk. I love hostas because they're pretty robust, and it's the first plant that I grew, and I chopped it in half and it survived. I had 2 bits. And then I came across a group that were fragrant, and I thought, wow, that's double whammy. Even if you get shredded leaves, you're going to get a really nice flower. In the collection, I have currently 137 plantagenetic cultivars and hybrids. It's the only hosta that bears fragrance. The smell is lily-like, but it's not as strong as a lily. Fragrance is supposed to be more intense in the evening for plantagenetic cultivars. Generally, hostas do like the shade, but the plantagenea group, some of them actually require sunlight to flower and also for the scent. I think my favourite hosta is probably Fragrant Bouquet, partly because it was one of the first ones that I became aware that was fragrant, and I thought what a great bonus it was to have fragrance as well as a lovely leaf. There are also others. I've got one called Stargate just here that is really pretty. It's got a nice variegated leaf. Hosta Cathedral Windows, there's another pretty one. It's got a lightly glossy leaf and variegated, and again, quite a large flower and fragrant. Slugs are a problem, and springtime is the most important time to clear up all the debris early on and lightly turn the soil to expose the slug eggs, and then the birds will take them away. I have the luxury of having Indian runner ducks roaming around the plot, which help with the slugs and the snails. They seem to cause little damage. They can push all through the plants and they just spring up again. And unlike chickens, they don't scratch, which is good.
He does need to get planning permission to do anything in the garden, in my garden.
Yeah, in your garden. But once I come up the bank, across the border, it's mine, so.
2 hostas have appeared in my herb beds, but I'm quite happy with that, actually.
I feel really proud of what we both produced here. It was just a dream to start with, but it's reality now. This is a complete change in lifestyle, but a better one, I think.
You can visit James and Carol's garden and see the hostas for yourself, amongst all the other wonderful plants that are there. And you get details of when it's open and how to get there from our website. Now, hostas are greedy, thirsty plants, but they will take some shade. So I'm transplanting the divided section under the shade of this viburnum. But the roots are drying the soil out a little bit. So I'm going to put some compost underneath the plant, as much as anything else, to act as a bit of a sump for moisture. And the key thing for successful hostas is that they aren't too dry in winter. And as this floods in winter, it's guaranteed to be wet. And they seem to like it for that reason. And I've discovered that an awful lot of hosta damage is a result of stress. A happy hosta tends not to be eaten so much by slugs and snails. This will give it a really good start in life, and water it really well. Right. Come on, here. Look. Now, Nigel, let me show you something glorious. This is the beginnings of a new asparagus bed. I grew asparagus in what is now the cottage garden for the last 3 or 4 years, and it really didn't go well. It was too shady a position. Now, asparagus is something that should last 20 years or more. So if it's not working, you need to cut your losses, which is what I've done, and I've started afresh. If sowing some salad is a one-night stand, this is plighting your troth for 50 years of marriage. It's a long-term relationship, so it's worth doing it properly. And the key to growing asparagus is drainage, and then some more drainage. And this is heavy Herefordshire clay. So I put in a trench about 1 metre wide, and the bottom of the trench has been turned over. So in a sense, it's a kind of double digging.
Then add as much sharp sand or horticultural grit as you can afford. You really can't have too much drainage. Add some well-rotted manure or garden compost if you've got it, and mix it up well. You can rotivate the bottom of the trench very successfully. When you've mixed in the grit and the compost thoroughly to the bottom of the trench and raked it smooth, make a pair of raised ridges on which to plant the asparagus crowns.
Can you hear the buzzards? There's one just up there, right above. And as the day's heating up, they ride the thermals for the first time in the year. Beautiful bird. After all that preparation, we can start to plant. And what I should be putting in are these. These are 1-year-old asparagus crowns. And essentially, the crown is this little bit there with a bud. And these are the roots. They're very brittle. And when you get them through the post, they will be very dry. So soak them for at least an hour before planting, and that will rehydrate them. And the way to plant them is simply to drape them either side of the ridge, like that. I'm spacing them about 1 foot apart. And the reason why I've put them on top of the ridges is for drainage. The asparagus season is here anyway, mid-April, in a good year, and May in a bad year, to the end of June. Traditionally, you stop cutting on Midsummer's Day. And the reason for that is to give the poor old crown a chance to develop foliage to supply enough power for next year's plants. That's just over half the trench planted with Guelph Millennium. And then I've got some Stewart's Purple, which I've ordered but haven't yet arrived. They'll come sometime next week, and I will fill it up with those. Now, I'm not aiming just to lightly cover them. The crowns, i.e. the top of the ridge, must be 4 to 6 inches below the soil. So what I'm going to end up with is a raised bed. And it's worth checking after a few months to see if the crowns are buried. Just gently dig down. If you've got any doubt at all, put a thick layer of compost on top. They must be well buried. Don't harvest any in the first year. Just 1 or 2 cuttings in the second year. Until June the 1st, the third year, and then fourth year, gorge yourself on asparagus. And remember, you go and cut them when the water is boiling. You want as quickly as possible to go from garden into pan. But you can roast them, you can make fantastic omelettes with them, really good soup. In fact, I like to eat the small sprues, the very thin ones, make fantastic soup. However you eat them, they're wonderful, and we should all be doing it. But if you don't fancy doing something that involves hours of hard work for a crop that you can only eat for a couple of months, here are some other things you can be doing this weekend.
Buddleja should be pruned in spring. And it's important to cut hard, because this will stimulate vigorous new growth which in turn carry this year's flowers. Now, you can go right down to the lowest visible bud, but I like to leave a framework, especially for buddlejas growing in a border. Although in many gardens the soil is still too cold to sow direct, you can plant out young plants if we protect them. I've got some rocket and lettuce here. Space them fairly generously to allow the roots to grow strongly, and also always in rows, because that makes hoeing much easier. And then cover them either with fleece or with cloches. And that will keep the worst of the cold off and allow them to grow strongly to give you a delicious early harvest. I shan't be planting my runner bean seeds for another month or so, but now is a good time to put up the support in readiness. It doesn't matter what you use, but it must be robust. I like to use hazel bean sticks, not least because I think they look really nice. Prepare the ground well, and then either use a wigwam or a long structure, but either way, make sure it's really secure and will carry the weight of a heavy crop for months to come.
Sometimes it's good just to sit. And it's just getting warm enough so you can sit outside. And if I sit very quietly by the pond and stop Nigel charging around, you can hear the frogs. And then, if I'm still enough, eyes appear, and then a head or two will poke out. And occasionally, 10, 20, 30 at a time will just start to appear out of the water. You know, but you do have to be very still and very quiet. See? Over the winter, we went to South Africa, specifically looking at how plants that are very familiar to many of us in our garden grow in their natural habitat. Because when you see plants growing in the wild, that's the best clue on how to grow them for maximum performance in our own gardens, wherever those gardens might be. And this week, we're looking at agapanthus.
South Africa contains a huge variety of different habitats. This is the fynbos in the Western Cape, a complex, rich floral habitat, and home to Agapanthus africanus, which was the first agapanthus to be discovered in Africa. The soil here is sandy and acidic, and the climate is hot and dry. So when Africanus arrived in Britain in the 1600s, it didn't like our cooler, wetter conditions. Fortunately, as plant hunters explored deeper into South Africa, a less fussy variety was discovered, which was called Agapanthus praecox, and that's another evergreen form. It's not fully hardy in the UK, but its vigorous nature has made it one of the parents of most agapanthus varieties available around the world today. But it was the discovery of much hardier species of agapanthus growing in the mountainous regions that finally enabled the plant to thrive in UK gardens. Robin Simmons is an expert in indigenous plants and lives in the Drakensberg Mountains in South Africa's northeast.
Up here at Sunny Pass, Drakensberg, we found the wonderful, wonderful Agapanthus campanulatus. Its habitat is sort of rocky areas, grows in between rocks, on top of rocks. Amazing, amazing dark blue flowers. One way of identifying these plants is actually this wonderful purple stem, which is a real feature. These plants are deciduous in order to cope with extreme cold weather up here. Winter, -15, can be anything up to -18, with temperatures in the summer going quite high, sort of 30s. but they can cope with these extreme temperatures. They're really water-wise plants. And I would say in England, with the amount of rain that you actually get, they would bulk up quite quickly. You'd be able to use them in the meadows. You'd be able to use them in a rockery. Wonderful. It's a very versatile plant. Here we have the Agapanthus campanulatus subspecies patens, which is a much smaller little plant and a lot more delicate. And when they're fully opened, it's a tiny little ball. Grows in slightly different conditions to the Agapanthus campanulatus. This one likes deep soil. It is a deciduous plant, and it grows in amazing sort of unusual areas for Agapanthus. It grows in the shade, so you can plant it in your garden, and it will really perform. And as you see, in a sort of a shady area, it will kind of like bling out at you. It comes in a variety of colors, and it's versatile. Up here, temperatures will go down to minus 15, 16. It's also growing right next to running water. It really is a tough plant.
This adaptation to cold winters and wet summers make the deciduous mountain Agapanthus species ideal for our British gardens. There are a huge number of Agapanthus varieties on the market today, and breeders are using the hardy deciduous species and the common evergreen prycox to create a staggering array of hybrids, trying to harness the very best attributes of each. John Rourke is one of South Africa's leading plant experts.
The plant breeders today are looking to extend the range of colours, forms and heights. And they're using most of the deciduous species from the interior of South Africa, where the deepest, darkest blues are found, to incorporate the best colours of the deciduous species with the growth forms of the evergreen species, so that you have a combination of the best characters of both those growth forms. This selection, for example, has Agapanthus inapertus in its parentage. It's a tubular flowered species with a very deep colour to the corolla. On the other hand, this pale blue selection across here is rather different. It has a very open flower head and a very dense inflorescence. And it has an upright form which appeals greatly to flower arrangers. This mauve flowered selection, it's actually a multi-petaled form. If you look carefully, you'll see it has a multitude of petals. It's almost tending to double. There's a distinct pinkish tinge to the vein running down the centre of each petal. And that represents the holy grail of Agapanthus breeding, to try and produce forms with a more lilac or even possibly a pinkish tinge to them. They are, of course, very symbolic of summer in South Africa. Blue skies, blue seas, white sands on beaches.
These spectacular new Agapanthus hybrids provide us with a rich variety. But their hardiness in UK gardens is entirely dependent on how much cold tolerance they've inherited from their deciduous mountain parents. It's this ancestry that makes them tough enough to survive and thrive in our gardens.
Agapanthus are one of those plants that can be sort of infuriating, really, because when you see them growing in South Africa or in Madeira or somewhere like that, just spreading and seemingly so at home, you think that's how they want to be. However, they really can be grown well here if you just adhere to a few basic rules. But we've had letters, and I often do get letters from people seemingly very frustrated with their attempts to grow agapanthus. I've got a few here. We've got one from Deborah Winstanley saying she's got 8 plants she has had for 3 years and they've never flowered. And Pat McGuckin has said, I've got 10 healthy agapanthus and only 2 buds between them. Can I do anything to encourage them to flower? And Lola Pollard says, I've got a large agapanthus which is broken out of its pot. Please, can you advise me what to do with it now? Well, to get agapanthus to flower, you do need to restrict its roots. You do need to make sure they have very good drainage, and I suspect that's half the problem. But also, you do need to make sure that they're fed, so it's getting a balance between enough food and water, but not too much. The first thing to do is get the drainage. So crocks in the bottom of the pot. The next thing to do is to put in the compost. Now, what I've got here is a mix, a quarter grit, a quarter peat-free potting compost, a quarter leaf mould, and a quarter garden compost. But if you can add at least grit to a potting compost, that is going to make a difference. There's no point in putting an agapanthus into too big a pot, because all you'll get is lots of leaves and no flowers. This is a deciduous agapanthus called Castle of May, and I've chosen it because it's nice and vigorous, flowers all summer long, so I'm going to put 3 in the pot, and even then, there's plenty of room for the roots to grow. So I'll take them out of the pot and put them in. Now, can you see how I bang that and nothing? It's just like hitting a lump of rock. The roots are really firmly in there. In fact, I'm going to have to cut that out. There you go. How about that for a root-bound plant? But that's perfectly healthy. So we'll have 1 like that and 2 more. There we go. And there we are. So 3 plants is about right for a pot of that size. And then we put round this very well drained, but quite nutritious compost. Put them somewhere in maximum sunlight. Water them once a week, feed them once every 2 or 3 weeks. And then at the end of the summer, take them somewhere cool. Doesn't have to be warm at all, but just frost-free. Well, that's it for this week. And don't forget, this weekend, the clocks go forward. So, more time in the garden, and very quickly, we'll have lovely, long evenings outside. I'll see you back here at Longmeadow next Friday. Till then, bye-bye.